Oh, hi, welcome back. So, if you didn't catch the little shorts that I threw up last week, had a little bit of a technical boo-boo. I forgot to charge up my little furry hamster mic here, and I babbled at length about a pile of records for a round of about half an hour, and most of it had no sound. So, I put up a couple of little clips there telling you what was going on, showing you what I was talking about. The whole shorts thing is weird to me. I probably should upload more of them. It's so easy to just, say something real quick for under a minute and throw it up there. It is weird how my announcement got kind of a lot of views for me. This 30-second thing just being like, hey guys, sorry, I'm a moron. Odd how that works with the algorithms and all that. The pile of stuff that I showed off kind of took a little bit longer to creep up to the same amount of views. I don't know, interesting data related stuff. I guess it might have something to do with the whole like selfies picking up the algorithm more, or pictures of my awkward, uncomfortable face kind of coming up quicker in people's feeds for one reason or another. But anyways, it's time to talk about the pile. Kind of an unintentional thread I've noticed as I've been kind of sifting through. This is an amalgamation of some pursuit of that kind of kraut and psych and sort of progressive stuff that I've been into lately, kind of 70s hard rock that's kind of trippy, and some raging hardcore punk. But there's a fair amount of overlap. I think part of it has to do with the fact that a few of these I picked up at Big Fun Records in Beverly recently. I went on a little record shopping trip with my friend Jake, and somebody sold their collection of 2000s, mid 2000s hardcore, and I picked up, as you'll see, a bunch of records. And this was a great time for a little bit more experimentation with like traditional raging fast hardcore, weaving in hard rock, 70s hard rock and like proto metal, Sabbathy kind of stuff. Other than the bands mentioned, a few of them, there's also, there were bands like the Suicide File and No Time Left from Buffalo. Inepsy got huge, even though they were more like a straight Motorhead worship with some Discharge thrown in. It seemed like it's just the general greater conversation the first decade of this century has been like revisiting old rock and roll and doing new stuff with it. When you think about it, it makes sense too, because the White Stripes were blowing up. All that stuff, like the Strokes and all that, was huge. So I guess it all kind of makes sense in context. But there's other examples too. Like right on the top of the pile, there's a newer hardcore record that I'm going to talk about in just a second that does involve kind of a more of a rock influence. And I think it is great when you have just raging hardcore with hooks and riffs, good examples that really are finally kind of getting their due way later, I feel like, or at least they should, is the Face Value from Cleveland that had like straight up like Dio era Sabbath stuff woven in. RKL, Rich Kids on LSD from the 80s, were brilliant musicians and kind of wove in a lot of like kind of metallic and hard rock stuff in with like fast punk rhythms. So I think that's a cool thing. That's definitely right up my alley. I like the combination of the two. So if I'm going to get thematic with this pile, it's loosely that's going to be what it's going to be here. So at the top is a record that I saw all the time just a couple of months ago. Different groups I'm on Boomer Facebook there, and I saw it on Instagram. Japanese band called Kriegshog, Love and Revenge. I gotta take the shrink off of this, but kept the hype sticker. I thought it was interesting because it says their influences are still there with Kuro Zuo. I never know how to pronounce Zuo. Zuo, Z-O-U-O. The Clay, shaking hands with the darkest 70s hard rock via Jerusalem and the modern stoner rock via Caius or Sleep. And the band motto still remains the same: play loud and die. I think it might be, if I may say, just to be respectfully put it, I think that's a little bit embellishing. I've heard there's a few like real good licks on this that are kind of hard rockish. I will say that it isn't just like a redo of Death Side or Bastard. And those bands had a lot of hooks too for their time, that kind of raging, Burning Spirits kind of hardcore stuff. This does have a lot more kind of catchiness and rock to it, but I don't feel like it was the same way that another band, Skit Kids from Sweden, where it would be like a fast Discharge part and then like a Motorhead lick. It doesn't feel like that, but it is super catchy. It is very varied in tempo on this. You've got those real trademarked kind of Japanese hardcore vocals that are just this awesome kind of like deep singing sort of growl. It's hard to explain, but very, very cool. This is only 8 songs. It's just quality, catchy Japanese hardcore, with maybe a little bit of like hard rock and metal influence. There's not like full-on sleep riffs in this or anything like that. That would be cool if there was, but there's not. I would say also, if you're looking for stuff more in that direction, Boris has some kind of hardcore leaning stuff. They have a split with Rocky and the Sweden, and then another record that's all like more kind of hardcore leaning, because they're always experimenting with different sounds on every record. But this is a good example of catchy Japanese hardcore with a little bit more like kind of rock and roll songwriting and memorability to it, I'd say. But definitely worth the purchase. 8 songs, which, you know, with this kind of music is kind of more of a mini LP than an LP because it's short. But, you know, I'd love a couple more songs even. I think that'd be great. They don't overstay their welcome on this at all. Then you've got Mob 47, Tils du Dor, first actual full length by Mob 47. Classic Swedish hardcore band, put out a 7-inch and appeared on some comps and did, I think, some demos and stuff in the 80s. Incredible stuff. They were a little bit more, I want to say, American hardcore influence for their time rather than their counterparts like Crude SS and whatnot. There's a little bit more kind of like maybe Boston hardcore of the early 80s, kind of showing an influence on their stuff, and maybe like pre-metal DRI, that kind of thing. But I am just completely blown away by 40 plus years later, they come out with this. I want to say their 7-inch was 83 or 84, but roughly 4 decades later, they come out with a full-length LP and completely honor their original sound. This sounds like a slightly tightened up, slightly cleaned up, very like audibly loud and clear, but certainly not slickly produced or anything like that. There's no like clicky, dry, sterile metal production or anything along those lines. Just fast, relentless, raging Swedish hardcore. And it's like they stepped into a time capsule, froze themselves in carbonite, and then we're just like, okay, let's finally record that album. You know, it's perfect for what they're doing. It's so good. Came out on Beach Impediment Records. The Kriegshog came out on La Vida es un Muse. Get into the 2000s stuff here. Stepped into Big Fun Records in Beverly, Mass. The shop owner, Josh, was like, oh, yeah, I've been meaning to price out a bunch of stuff. A guy sold his collection, a bunch of hardcore stuff. Are you guys interested? And my friend Jake and I were like, oh, yeah, for sure. And it was a box of mostly mid to late 2000s hardcore stuff. I bought this Mind Eraser when it came out and sadly flipped it at a certain point, just when I was like low on money. I was trying to keep the essentials, so I kept like their full lengths and everything. This is a 2-song EP. This is Mind Eraser's take on sludge. Now, if you're asking who is Mind Eraser, well, they were a hardcore band from the Boston area from the early 2000s to mid 2010s, I want to say. Members went on to a bunch of stuff. I've already talked about a bunch of the members' other projects extensively on this channel, but the drummer was Brendan Radigan, now vocalist of Pagan Altar and Magic Circle. The vocalist was Justin DeTore, who is the mastermind behind Innumerable Forms, also played in Magic Circle. I could go on and on and on. It's kind of a gag. I've just been posting people's Discogs spiels saying everything they've been in. But suffice to say, Chris Corey is now in Lifeless Dark. Suffice to say, these guys went on to do lots and lots of great stuff. And Mind Eraser was great too. A lot of people these days, there's been a reunion. A lot of people are nostalgic for Weekend Nachos, which is weird because it still feels like that's a current band to me, because the older you get, the more time speeds up and you don't realize decades have passed, and it's really scary. But that being said, people really are waxing nostalgic about Weekend Nachos or playing reunions. I like their first 7-inch. I probably enjoyed their other stuff, the Relapse record and everything, but I never really got into that band so much. And it's probably because I lived here in Boston, and Mind Eraser was just such a force for this kind of like, I don't know, second wave power violence. I don't know what you want to call it, but taking a lot of influence from, you know, those classic West Coast bands like Neanderthal, Infest, Crossed Out, all that stuff, and kind of involving a little bit more of an earache influence, like a little bit more maybe Terrorizer in there. You get a little bit of classic New York hardcore rearing its ugly head here and there. They weren't just a one-trick pony with trying to do power violence. They had other stuff that they were very seamlessly blending into their sound. And with this one, they decided to go a bit more of a sludge route. This is a 12-inch with 2 songs on it. That's the title of it, Conscious, Unconscious. Around this time, they also came out with a 7-inch that was the opposite. It was like 12 songs on a 7-inch, 14 songs. It was a bunch of songs on a 7-inch. So it was this kind of like, you know, duality of man thing they were doing that was very cute. This is awesome. I love the lurching, slow, doomy parts. You know, having known the members of this band, I know that they know their doom metal and all that stuff, weaving in those kind of influences, kind of making it a lot more epic. There's still plenty of like in your face, manic paced kind of power violence stuff going on. Justin's killer shouted hardcore vocals. You know, I know probably a lot more people know him for his more death metal vocals nowadays with his current projects, but he was a great hardcore vocalist as well. Just an all in all great, you know, however long this is, 20 minutes or so of music. Cover is by Joe Patagna. I think I'm saying that right. The guy who did all the artwork for Motorhead for years, created the War Pig. My favorite being like the cover for Rock and Roll and Orgasmatron, but you can tell it's the same kind of approach to color and everything on the painting there. These monks hauling a sarcophagus up a mountainside. That's so dope. So yeah, Mind Eraser. Conscious, Unconscious. Happy to have that back in the fold. Then a record that I was shamed out of buying once because of the cover art. This is Trip, Trance, and Traveling by Paintbox. So Paintbox, again, if you want to talk about Japanese hardcore royalty, the guitarist Chelsea, who is no longer with us, was in Deathside. You know, he helped kind of like pioneer a lot of that Blazing Spirits sort of like melodic lead work over hyper fast hardcore that a lot of Japanese hardcore is known for. There's another well-known member of the band that's in a band that I'm not familiar with, but I'll put a caption at the bottom. I'm somewhat knowledgeable about Japanese hardcore. I'm still kind of a casual Japanese hardcore kind of guy, despite, you know, showing off that bin with this stuff. But this came out, I believe this was their last record before Chelsea passed. And Paintbox was always cool because they, again, have a great influence of rock and roll, hard rock, over raging hardcore, melded with raging hardcore, some metal. There's these really regal, kind of like Queen, Brian May sort of solos all over everything here. There's a lot of variation. It does indeed get kind of trippy at points. Not like extremely weird and pondering and psychedelic, but a little, it gets weird. And there's parts of it that are so melodic. Aside from, again, those kind of raging, kind of throaty Japanese hardcore vocals, it does get kind of almost, dare I say, sort of Fat Wreckish at certain points, you know, like that really clean, like no effects sort of layered production. But here and there, it touches on that, and then it careens into like almost blast beats, and then something else weird. It's a really, really big journey here you're going on with Paintbox. This is a double LP. This came out on Prank. It came out, I want to say 2008 or 2009. I went into the Newbury Comics on Newbury Street with a friend of mine who shall remain unnamed from Syracuse. And I was like, oh, new Paintbox. And he's like, you're not going to buy that, man. Look at that thing. Not going to buy that. That's awful. I'm like, And there was a billion other things that I wanted. And this was kind of expensive at the time, I want to say, or maybe, I don't know. But for one reason or another, I was shamed out of purchasing this, but I reclaimed it. I reclaimed it, whatever, 15 years later, however long it's been. And then finally, you want to talk about the ultimate marriage of rock and roll, 70s hard rock and roll, and raging hardcore. This is almost like a weird, uncanny valley, alternate reality version of Black Flag. If Black Flag was like more showing their influence from Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult and Deep Purple. Not saying that Greg Ginn is a bad guitarist necessarily, but he's very focused in one lane. This is more like real kind of riffy, I wouldn't say guitar virtuoso, but the dude knows what he's doing with the guitar work on this. It's snotty. Again, you want to talk about like maybe a little bit of a nod to RKL, like look at that cover art, you know. It's got that great sort of like Simi Valley, California kind of vibe to it. It's perfect. It's so catchy. It's so perfectly centered between great, raging 80s style hardcore punk from California and like Deep Purple, Blue Oyster Cult, that kind of stuff. It's so fun to listen to. This is probably my favorite record. This is the second one. It's just Annihilation Time 2. They also had Annihilation Time 3. There might have been another one that I'm forgetting. Members went on to do a bunch of other stuff, including Lecherous Gaze, who I've still yet to check out, and a bunch of other projects that I have not kept up with. But this band was awesome. I was fortunate enough to catch them a few times. There's been a few members that were in Gordon Soley Motherfuckers, which was a band that was around in the late 90s that were a wrestling themed hardcore punk band that were just straight up raging fast kind of stuff, kind of Japanese influenced as well as kind of like youth crewish with Tony Erba, who's a great vocalist, one of my favorite hardcore frontmen. So they definitely have a great pedigree of stuff. They just went a little bit more rock and roll with this project, and it's a beautiful, beautiful combination. Strongly recommended. And I have a feeling that at some point people are going to rediscover how amazing this stuff was, and records might get expensive. But like this I got on the shelf for like $15 and it's so killer. Oh yeah. And then I got a couple other things there I want to say, but first and foremost, I grabbed this. This is Galaxis. This was in the Krautrock section. I ripped off the hype sticker, but it said something about like, you know, long lost tapes of this obscure German Krautrock band. You know, I kind of get what Aaron was saying about Aaron the Metal Theologian, for those of you, those casual viewers. I get what he was saying about the whole Krautrock label, how it's just kind of limiting. It doesn't really mean anything other than the bands are from Germany. Because you'll get all this wild experimental stuff, you know, like Faust or Can, and then a band like this who's just, I mean, they cover Sweetleaf. Like this is straight up dirtbag, you know, fuzzy mustache, big amps, big attitude, you know, proto metal, hard rock kind of stuff. And it's great. It sounds like it was recorded, you know, on a potato in a basement kind of thing. It sounds really, really raw, which I like. Probably on a reel-to-reel or something, honestly. It's not muffled or anything, but it's very, very raw recording, which is awesome. You know, the whole unintentionally punk kind of thing. But yeah, it is straight up like rockin', obscure, lost to the sands of time until recently, krautrock kind of stuff. And then finally, I just bought this on a whim there. This is Dope Purple, Children in Darkness. You know, I've been on this psych kick, doom kick, whatever, prog kick. I was like, the band's called Dope Purple. They appear to be Japanese. You know, it looks like it's psych. It's 3 songs on a 12-inch, but like full length. So let's see what I get into kind of thing. Record was pretty cheap. And it's just one wall of sound the entire way through. It's minimal vocals, maybe none. I only listened to it once. I'm going to spin it again, but just as a collection update, you know, mention what it sounded like. It's a lot to take in. Massive, like throbbing, noisy, you know, wah guitar, just a psychedelic mess. The messiest parts of like the noisiest Hawwind stuff is just the entirety of what this is comprised of. It's ridiculous. It's great, but it's definitely just a big, loud mess of psychedelia for, you know, 40 minutes. Then this hit me in the nostalgia bone. Went across the street to B-Side Records, I believe it's called, in Beverly. Another great shop that specializes in hip hop. And I was like, you know, I have a lot of hip hop on cassette and CD. I think my hip hop section for vinyl is like that. I have like NWA, Bob Dylan LP, and like 1 or 2 other things. A Kendrick, Good Kid, Mad City. You know, like not a lot of stuff. And I was like, I should grab, you know, something, beef that up a little bit. One of the first artists I ever listened to, not let alone, you know, hip hop artists, but one of the first things I ever owned, I think it was a Christmas or birthday, sometime in the mid 80s. I think I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. I got the first Weird Al record, the self-titled one with another one, Rides the Bus, and all the classics. The debut, the Necro one, just one man and his rage, and one accordion playing, you know, spoof rock. And then I got the Fat Boys Are Back, which is that one right there. And I listened to both endlessly. You know, I had my little bedroom, my tape player, and just Fat Boys and Weird Al, my 2 tapes. Not a hint of metal anywhere in sight. I think that came like a year later. I got AC/DC, Who Made Who, on tape. I was also very into No Jacket Required by Phil Collins at the time. And I just got into the whole immersion of listening to music over and over again while reading. And the book I was reading, unfortunately, I don't have the original copy that was given by a family friend. He wrote something on the inside that was very nice. I found this on Amazon quite a while ago now, over a decade, but I would read this over and over. This book on giants, you know, it's almost like kayfabe, like anthropological giants study. Is it really anthropological if it's not human, if they're giants? I don't know, whatever. It reads like almost like a textbook, or a historical book or a science book about giant society. And there's some amazing art in this. This is probably my favorite, the one where he's holding up the knight like that. So anyway, I read this cover to cover over the years. I've been meaning to get something from this tattooed on me. That's the ideal back piece right there, the frost giant. Anyways, that kind of, I think, had a massive effect of like the aesthetic that I like. You know, I was always a fan of fantasy growing up and all that kind of stuff, and metal and everything. So yeah, Fat Boys and that book. So, and Fat Boys, you know, it's 80s hip hop, early hip hop stuff. I'm probably one of the first people that really brought the beatboxing thing into the fold, like the human beatbox. And for that alone, I mean, pretty talented stuff, pretty cool. I've watched Disorderlies at least 4 or 5 times. Love the Fat Boys. Then I just picked this up, not really knowing exactly what it, I mean, obviously I know who Hawwind are, but what this is, there's not much information. This is all pre-Lemmy stuff. It's in the beginning. I recognize a few songs off the self-titled. It's got Hurry On Sundown. A lot of it's very raw. It apparently appears to be very early, like demo and live recordings of Hawwind stuff. So great, you know, early British psychedelia, hard rock stuff. Cool recording. Don't have too much by Hawwind on vinyl, so I was happy to add this to it. But yeah, it's so minimalist. Like there's not anything as far as a song listing on the back, just members. And then, yeah, Paranoia, See It As You Really Are, I Do, Came Home. Master of the Universe, that's a great song. Dreaming, Shouldn't Do That, also a great song. Hurry On a Sundown. So good stuff though. Then a few updates back when I was talking about Faust. Aaron, the metal theologian, made a bit of a response video just talking about like krautrock and all that stuff. And that dude's infinitely knowledgeable about most kinds of music. And he had a couple of ones that he mentioned, a couple of recommendations. So of course I snapped him up. This is Drosselbart LP. This is cool. I like the globe with the worms coming out of it. It reminds me of that one Plasmatics record, you know, that Maggots record. This is awesome, like really airy, like it feels really fantasy-ish. Speaking of that kind of stuff there with the Giants book, kind of prog. It almost sounds like the soundtrack to like a Ralph Bakshi movie. I could hear this like in fight scenes, some like rotoscoped like fight scenes in the background in Wizards or Fire and Ice or something like that. It's got flute, it's got male and female vocals. Jemima, the woman who sings in this band, she might be classically trained or something. And beautiful, beautiful melodic vocals from her. It's very like fairyland sounding. It gets heavy-ish at points, kinda, but it's overall, it's just this really cool tapestry of like influences, and it's very transformative. I'm trying to think. It's very like transcendent. You know, it's everything that I think like I want when I pop on a prog record or a psychedelic kind of record. Also considered like krautrock or whatever, but I mean, it's kind of proggy, it's kind of psych, you know. What are labels though? You know, what are you gonna do? Then you got Birth Control with Operation. I mean, this is one of these records that, like, if I was perusing, because I've done this before, if I was perusing looking for like proto metal or 70s hard rock or anything like weird prog, weird psych, and I just came across this, I'd be like, yes, a giant grasshopper eating babies for some reason. Like, yeah, I'm gonna buy that on the cover art alone. You know, like that other one that I bought that had Giger cover art not that long ago. Name's escaping me. I'll put it right there. I bought that just because of the cover art. You know, oh, Walpurgis. You know, I bought the Walpurgis LP because on CD because, you know, it's called Walpurgis and it has Giger cover art. Like, who cares if it's, you know, not that great? And thankfully, I rolled the dice and came up with a 20 because it's pretty good. Anyway, this is also great. Like Aaron was saying, it's a hard rocker. It's got some killer organs on it. You know, I feel like if anything has Hammond organ, it's gonna remind me of Deep Purple and Uriah Heep. Pretty much, yeah. You know, it gets a little bit wilder, I think, with like the songwriting, the song structures. It's a little bit more like kind of brave with the songwriting choices. It goes all over the place a little bit more. But yeah, it's a ripper, more importantly than anything else. It's great. That cover, oh yeah, the Pope is on the back there. real interesting looking gatefold. Cool, early 70s German stuff. 71 this came out. Then we got Thank Christ for the Bomb by the Groundhogs. You know, this is the masterpiece that is a massive influence on The Damned, if the hype sticker is to be correct on this. Yeah, Captain Sensible mentions it. And you can see that. This is very attitude-laden, very serious with the social messaging, political messaging. Definitely taking a big step outside of the really bluesy stuff from earlier that they did. I can hear the sort of like kinship to maybe like the Electric, Neil Young and Crazy Horse kind of stuff a little bit, or like Dead Moon, you know, just stuff that it kind of reminds me of a little bit. You can see how it's definitely like a proto-punk and proto-garage. It's almost like if that song Eve of Destruction was like heavier and was an entire album. Yeah, this is great. I've got some of their later stuff too, like I got a dual CD, but I'm gonna be talking almost exclusively about recommendations soon as well. Just a update of just stuff that, especially with the prog stuff, I got recommendations from Aaron via his video, like a few emails and stuff like that, just being like, hey man, check this out. And a lot of this is uncharted territory for me. So I'm definitely listening to everybody that tells me to buy stuff, which is good and bad, but I'm done for a while. I'm just kind of absorbing all this stuff, and I'm going to be documenting my listening experience and sharing it with all of you. So look for a recommendation update soon. Maybe I'll shoot one tomorrow because I got to catch up. Then this is kind of unrelated to everything, but it's in the pile, so I'm going to talk about it. This is one of those, like, a hole to fill, a box to check as far as early American punk. Some call it post-punk. I've heard it called post-punk and proto-punk. So but The Modern Dance by Parubu. It's definitely arty. You know, it's got that weird kind of jangly, kind of angular, jangular even kind of musical approach. Sort of obnoxious, but like subtly so. It's a band from Ohio. I always hear them mentioned kind of in the same breaths as like the early stuff in American punk that was a little bit outside of like just straight up like Ramones kind of stuff. You know, I know these guys played at CBGB's even though they weren't like a New York band. I kind of hear them mentioned in the same breaths as like the B-52s and the Talking Heads and that kind of thing. So it's in that kind of general kind of range. It's a lot more, I'd say, like kind of angry than the aforementioned, you know, B-52s and Talking Heads. It kind of leans more in kind of a snarling direction. And another example of why Ohio is like massively underrated as a place for early punk in the 70s, especially like these guys, the Pagans. Why do not more people talk about the Pagans and how good they were? Rocket from the Tombs, you know, that kind of stuff. This is cool. It definitely has sort of a weird kind of herky-jerky arty vibe to it, but it's also like pretty pissed for its time, for what it is. And then finally, this was on sale. I was shopping at Newbury Comics, grabbing some birthday presents for the wife, and I saw this for 20 bucks in the RSD overrun, the RSD liquidation bin, if you will. So this is Caius Blues for the Red Sun. And I've been digging into Caius for the past couple of years, kind of exploring it. They were a band I didn't get in the heyday of Green Machine being on Headbangers Ball. For whatever reason, it just didn't resonate with me. A lot of the stonery stuff didn't resonate with me until years and years later. I just got into like Monster Magnet 2 recently. I talked about this at length a few updates ago, but exploring stoner rock without really any or very little doom in it, you know, that kind of thing. And I can see why this band was so massive now. You know, this is great, heavy, you know, mid to up tempo, very, very thick guitar toned, hard rock, kind of verging on metal kind of stuff. I watched a bunch of interviews and stuff like that not long after I started digging back into this stuff. And there's a Nirvana interview where Dave Grohl is talking about how they're an unsung grunge band and they're not from Seattle. They're from, you know, the desert, California. I mean, if you want to look at the whole grunge movement as something that's just like kind of evocative of 70s hard rock and kind of reinventing it in a modern, at the time, context, like, yeah, sure. But it's not like these guys sound like Soundgarden or Alice in Chains or anything like that. It's way more indebted to the 70s, I think, and kind of a boogie vibe, you know, that kind of thing. And I avoided Queens of the Stone Age for like a plague for a very long time too. Just this awful kind of knee-jerk thing that I've had throughout the years of trying to avoid anything popular, you know, the whole too punk for everything kind of thing, which I kind of regret because I do enjoy the few things I've checked out by them. I've been meaning to pick up like one of their more popular albums. So if you have any recommendations of Quotza stuff, whatever record you like best, just throw it in the comments. I've been kind of checking it out, but I got a couple other Caius records. I got Welcome to Sky Valley. I can see why this one is probably the one people go to the most often, if that's correct. If I'm wrong in that, let me know. But yeah, super enjoyable. I think this is on a cool colored vinyl. It's yellow. Look at that. It's yellow. How about that? Pretty sweet. So yeah, not bad for 20 bucks. It's kind of a steal, really. No liner notes though, man. What's going on? What's going on? Getting ripped off. All right. So if you enjoyed this, like, comment, and subscribe, all that fun stuff. Share with your friends, share with your weird friends. And that's about it. I gotta hit the gym. I gotta take a shower and hit the gym. Or maybe the other, yeah, it makes sense to do that the other way. Anyway, have a good one. Bye.